This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
Welcome to Godsplaining, or welcome back, I hope. Thanks to all those who support us if you enjoy the show. Please consider making a monthly donation, or a daily donation, or an hourly donation, or a 15-minute donation. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Jacob fantastic.
Yeah, let's
exactly.
go. I love it.
Father Joseph Anthony, it has been so long since I have done an episode with you that I have forgotten that you are not Father Jacob Bertrand. So it has been, since basically Rob Kazmark, right?
I think it's been that long since we did that guest episode with him, which was by far a great guest episode. If you're listening now, go back, listen to our guest episode with Rob Kazmark from Spirit Juice Studios. We talk about Marvel movies. We talk about cinematography and storytelling. It's one of my favorite episodes that I've done.
He's fantastic. We should do a Marvel one directly. Let's do a guest explaining back with him again on Marvel movies. In the comment box, if you want to know Marvel movies from a guy who's a producer and such, put down in the comment sections you'd like to see that. And Father Joseph Anthony and I will do a Marvel movie one with him because he's super great about everything. He's a super fun guy. Check out his Spirit Juice in general. So he's just a great guy. So we're gonna do that. But other than thinking about Rob and how great he is, and how much fun that was, and the fact that I haven't seen you in a while, what's going on? Like, catch me up in the last 6 months.
I know. It's good to get the backbenchers united again. I feel like we kind of had to go back our own ways and get back with the main
That's
three
right.
and whatnot. But look at us, the riffraff keeping it going. Listen, I love summers in Central Virginia. Virginia, you have family in the Central Virginia area, and it's fantastic. It's just such a great time to be out here. Starting to switch gears a little bit into the summer work and prepping for the new academic year. We're very lucky and blessed. Our campus ministry staff has been expanding because the ministry is expanding and we need more staff to serve the student population here. So it's a fun challenge as a leader. It's a fun challenge as a chaplain to start to switch gears and say, okay, how do I lead this expanded staff in a new way? All those skills and kind of moving from a mom and pop shop over to a legitimate ministry and business, you can't rely on those same skill sets. You have to relearn and reorient. So that's a fun challenge for me as a leader and the leader of this ministry to kind of challenge myself and reorient and think, how do I become a better chaplain? How do I become a better leader of our staff and making sure that we're moving in the same direction? So it's a fun time. It's exciting. It's also kind of terrifying. I'm
is this how long have you been the chaplain there? Is this a fifth year or fourth year?
5 years, man. 5 years. I got down here about 5.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm sure it's plenty of stories over top of that. Maybe we'll have to do
I want to kick it back to you and say where are you sitting for the summer now? What's going on your end?
I travel around a little bit, but my main work, as many people will know, is just to sit at a desk and translate German and write dissertation stuff. But I am heading to Philly for a retreat, to give a retreat to the Pink Sisters this coming week. If you're listening to this was in the past. So I'll be going to Philadelphia and doing a retreat there, and I'm excited to give a little retreat and go on a retreat myself as well. And we'll talk about phenomenology, and it'll be unintelligible, I suspect. But I'm probably the third or fourth guy in line they ask for, so you get what you get.
You get what you get.
And it's been nice, weather-wise. The air is rarefied, as Sinatra would say. But it's been nice here in DC because, as you say, it's so great to be Central Virginia summers, and that's not entirely true. It's just hot as anything.
It gets humid.
It's damnation hot. But we've had a nice breeze recently, and it's been pleasant out. And I've forgotten that this is DC a little bit. I'm enjoying it, but we're not going to talk much more about the weather per se, external weather, I should say. We're going to rather focus on, as you notice, an internal weather, a kind of storm that goes on, the heating up of the emotions and the heart, as Aquinas talks about. We thought we'd talk about the passion, the emotion, and I'm going to use those. Maybe Father Joseph Anthony will make a distinction with that. I'm going to use emotions and passions in the same way. Passions is the traditional terminology for things that we're talking about, but emotions are what most people talk about them, and the distinction isn't that important. So if you see me talk about passions or us talk about passions, emotions, just consider we're treating them basically the same here without distinction.
I refer to them simply as the feels.
The feels. Yeah, the feels. There you go.
It hits me right in the feels. Is what it is.
If we want to do it, Edmund Husserl will talk about feeling acts. And the particular feeling act that we're going to talk about today is anger. And I think it is the most misunderstood. It's a complicated emotion for all sorts of reasons. I think in the movie Inside Out, is that what it's called? Inside Out?
Yes.
The cool Pixar
animated movie.
Animated, Pixar movie on emotions and psychology, which is quite nice if you haven't seen this, and it has the different kind of emotions. And I think anger is he's a short stocky red guy. I think if I remember correctly,
big little bumbly red thing.
Yeah, that's right. But I think anger is an emotion that is misunderstood, and in the spiritual life and in the life of virtue, it's important to figure out what it is or think a little more clearly about it so that you're not blindsided or that you can live well. So anger, I think, is just a complicated one, and we'll say perhaps why in all sorts of ways. But Father Joseph Anthony, what do you think are like the biggest misunderstandings of anger, and what do you think? What do you generally feel in your college chaplaincy life with people when they talk about anger, for instance? What do you always have to correct them on, or what do you think about anger?
I think when it comes to anger, one of the misconceptions with it is that, the sin, once again, we'll get into talking about sins and what makes the difference between a passion or emotion and a sin. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Yeah. But I think when it comes to anger, they think the sin of anger is just being mad, in that you get upset at things, or I get annoyed, like something that I don't have this immediate, like unfiltered positive response to. If I have anything other than a positive response to something, then I'm this angry person and it's bad. I'm like, no, actually, we can have negative responses, emotional responses, passionate responses that are not positive, and that doesn't mean we're sinning, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing either. Like, we should probably have negative responses to things, and that we shouldn't feel bad about that. It's probably a sign that something's wrong, that there's an injustice somewhere, or there's a reason to be upset at something. It's okay when other people, whether it's a classmate, a roommate, a family member, it's okay when people annoy us. Like, these are personality differences. They're not automatically sins. It's not definitely the deadly sin of anger the capital vice that we'll talk about later. So I think that's my first response when we start talking about this, is the fact that, like, far too many people just assume if I've had a negative response to something, if I'm upset at something, I should be confessing it. And it's like, no, they forgot to put your pickles on your hamburger when you specifically asked them to. Like, I can be upset at that.
Yes, that's good. No, and that's a nice start, a foray into it. And then, so let's think about it for a second. You raised up the point about negative emotions. And the English language is tricky, so you might say, well, how is negative being used there? And you might initially think, well, a negative emotion is a negative thing. So it's like a negative in the sense of it's a bad thing, so it's morally negative. But negative emotions need not be that. We might just be describing them. It might not be a normative description, like negative means bad, but negative means describing the object. For instance, when I say, oh, look, here's a negative number, you don't go, get that out of my face. -5, I hate -5. -5 is just like 5, except it's on the other side of the dividing line, right? But it's just a placement of it. And that, I think, is important to understand the emotional life, because we have positive emotions and negative emotions. And you could say there are positive emotions that are good emotions and negative emotions are bad emotions. But before you have to figure out what makes an emotion good or bad. And that's to do with the object. In the math example, what makes a number good or bad? It's what side of the dividing line it's on, the 0 line. And to make emotion bad or good, it's what kind of object is the emotion related to. The emotions themselves, the passions, are not negative. Just like a number, 5 in itself is not positive or negative until I specify it. And there are negative emotions which are not negative. A negative in the quantitative, like the object of them is negative, but not negative in the moral sense, and they're not bad. And that's the kind of sum of it. This is Thomas Aquinas. He does his chart of things. Basic emotions, of course, concupiscible ones start out, it's all about love or hatred, and then you go to the object. Father Gregory would do a whole table, this sort of thing. You can just Google this. This isn't our shtick. But it is important to say
it's it's concise,
it's there,
it covers everything, very comprehensive.
Yeah. It's really fun. It's great, but what's helpful for it is that negative emotions are the emotions related to negative objects. So the negative emotions themselves don't describe the emotion as it is, but what it is moving towards. So your character of whether you should have this emotion or not depends on what the object is and the circumstances, not just the fact that you have that emotion. And that's what anger is. Anger is one of the, you could say, negative emotions that is not always negative, you know? It's a bit like, it's a bit like, for instance, sadness. Sadness is a negative emotion. Mm-hmm. And you might say that sadness or sorrow is something that we should entirely, like, you should always feel bad about being sad. Like, you should, if you have sorrow, you've done something wrong. But if your parent or your brother or your friend dies and you're not sorry, that's
a problem.
Bad. You should have a negative emotion in that time, right? So,
and I think we can talk about that too. Like, we can talk about the passions, the emotions, and we can go even further and say attractions or whatever, but like they have zero moral quality to them, right? And that's kind of what you're getting at, is just the experience, the presence of that thing that maybe has the quality of it, or not the quality, but like, as you were saying, like of itself isn't negative until you assign it somewhere. The character of it isn't of itself negative. But like your explanation with respect to sorrow is like, yes, sorrow as an experience is generally not a good thing. We don't want to encourage people to constantly be in sadness or sorrow, but in the right time, like it has its place because it points to the lack of a good, right? The losing a parent is our parents are good. We want our parents, when they're no longer with us, we're lacking a good in our life. And so the experience of sorrow is appropriate in that time. So I'm so thankful that you explained it the way you did, is because it's like just those experience in the presence of those negative emotions, such as anger, being upset at something. Now we have to be a little more discerning on how we look at that. So when we start doing a daily examination of conscience and say, oh my gosh, my day was filled with anger. Okay, well, let's go a little further and start to work through that now.
Okay, so let's dig down a little bit on let's dig down. So we've got the sense of negative emotions and positive emotions and the fact that it's by the object. So let's as you say, let's go down and talk about anger specifically when we're doing our examination of conscience, or when we're thinking, oh, I felt angry. Was that good or bad? Should I have? And first off, feelings are just feelings. It's a question of, I was angry, so it's a doing. Right. Happenings aren't sins are things that you do. They're not things you feel, Okay, but so for anger,
before we go in that, like one thing I'm always talking with my college students about is sins are in the will. I feel like I've said this 15,000 times in the confessional. I've probably said it 15,000 times on the podcast, and I never get sick and tired of it. But sins are in the will. They're not in our intellect, and they're not in our passions. And so just as you were saying, having that feeling of being perturbed or angry at something, that's something that happens to us. But sins are the doings. I acted in this way. I was vengeful against something or whatnot. So we can break that down, but it's so good to highlight at the very beginning that sins are in the will of the human person. It's a consent. Right. It's an act of consent towards
exactly right. Way. It's an action. Yeah. So okay, let's talk about anger then. So anger is, in some broad definition of it, something like it's a movement of the emotions. It's a sense appetite, as Thomas says, sort of thing. It's a movement of your kind of physicality, you could say. Mm-hmm. Seeking revenge. So it's a movement of the sense appetite seeking revenge, and that might sound like, now wait a minute, that just sounds like a negative thing because it's always bad to seek revenge. But could you explain to us what is it? What's the revenge aspect of this? What's the anger actually about? You could say, or just spell that definition out a little.
Well, I think when we talk about anger, then we start to get into tricky places, because you're right. It is about revenge. It's about kind of that making up for something that was imposed on another person, maybe unjustly, or done to another person illegitimately. And so when we enter into that, we can say that maybe there are some opportunities or times where that is, once again, maybe that's appropriate. And we start to get into some tricky areas because we see things in scripture that are referencing anger in a positive way. You know, somebody being angry on behalf of the Lord's anger in the temple, seeing how the house of God was being used for illicit means, you know, different trade and things like that. So now we have to maybe qualify a little more about, like, well, okay, there can be good anger and bad anger. So what are we talking about with anger? Because you can see that maybe that revenge, or in a positive way, is restoring justice. So if something was done to, you know, somebody becomes a victim of some kind of crime, there might be an appropriate response of anger that this person had something illegitimately taken away from them. And to restore that is to actually act out of that response in anger for that injustice that was done. And that can even be on behalf of God too. We see that we want to restore something that was taken away illegitimately, or imposed, or done in such a way that we want to restore that justice. And that, in a sense, is a revenge for an action that causes anger within us, or not causes, but elicits a certain type of anger response out of us.
Yeah, and I think that's so. Revenge, again, is a word that you might think, you know, seeking vengeance is a bad thing. We shouldn't be seeking vengeance. Or if we're in comic book world, you know, vengeance is this. And we have these phrases like, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And so vengeance is something that's bad. And you think, well, actually, if the vengeance is the Lord's, then it must be good, because nothing that the Lord has is bad. So vengeance is good. The question is whether we can practice vengeance. And as long as you think that restoring injustices, like restoring justice, which is an act of vengeance, is something that we can do and are called to do. You might say, well, you know, just vengeance is mine, says the Lord, so it's not our job to do anything when there are injustices. You would be nuts. You would exclude yourself from the moral community that's called human beings. But so I'm going to grant that you can participate in vengeance, and therefore vengeance is restoring the right. Now, anger is, you know, interesting about anger is, of course, it is the seeking of revenge. So it's the movement of sense appetite, seeking of revenge, which is so important, because it's not necessarily achieving that. Because, and this is where you might say someone has done something wrong. So St. Thomas talks about generally the acts against that cause anger, the motives for anger, are slights done to one. He has a particular meaning by that, but a slight, so someone insults you, or someone treats you poorly, someone does something wrong to you. We're not talking about like big things, but little things that just kind of, you know, make you angry. You feel, all of a sudden, you feel this person has become an enemy of you or something. You have this movement of the affect towards this person, and you want to fix something. Something's been done wrong. Now, I like about the anger is it's not the act of, it's not an act of justice qua itself, but it's the seeking that, because it might very well be the case that even though you were angry, and justifiably so, and there's no need to confess this, you don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing you do. Yeah. Right? So maybe walk through, what do you think, what kind of situations what would be the considerations when you say, because we're making a positive case for anger. It's saying, look, if you're not attentive to the fact that you're angry at things and you don't endorse that, you're going to be a doormat, and you're not going to be fully human. Because just like if one of your parents dies, and you don't have sorrow about it, there's something wrong with you. If someone slights you and you don't feel angry and don't seek revenge, you're not feeling the desire and wanting revenge, then there's something wrong with you, right? And yet at the same point, we're not saying that therefore you can never sin in anger. Like you can never, anger turns out it's always good. You know, it's more like joy, although you can even sin in joy. But go ahead, explain when can anger be a sin, would you say, because of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a legitimacy to this, thinking about anger as a sin, and why we want to avoid it so much, and why people are so kind of like tense about it. Like any experience of it is like, oh, this is so bad. It's because it's one of the 7 capital sins, the 7 deadly sins. It's anger. is in there. And I remember, oh man, I forget exactly which Desert Father it was, but reading one of the Desert Fathers says anger is one of the sins that we can actually never overcome, and like he's like, it's always going to be there. It's one of those temptations that is perennial in humanity. And I like love that. I was like, wow, man, of all of those, sloth, envy, lust, and all that, he said anger is the temptation that we can never truly rid ourselves of. Like, it's always going to be there.
So when do we sin? When do we sin when we're angry, would you say?
And I think that's when we can talk about maybe two different kinds of anger, the difference between wrath and zeal. And I think when we move into wrath, that is when we are sinning, right? Wrath is going to be this unjust anger that isn't just that kind of emotional response to the slight or seeing that something's done, but now it's actually moving it into actuation. So I feel that and I want to respond, and I'm going to respond. So now I start acting out of wrath. And especially with anger, you find yourself blinders coming in, and you're like kind of honing in on a target, and you now want to inflict damage on that. And it's like, I've experienced damage, so my retaliation, my avenge is to damage and destroy either the name of somebody else or the physical property or physical person that's in front of me. And I move this now into just this negative emotion or negative feeling. And now I start to inflict out of wrath the damage and retaliation to the other. And I think that's when we can actually start talking about the sins of anger and the sins of wrath, is that kind of moving to inflicting some kind of damage.
That seems really helpful about the damage part. I think it's helpful in wrath and zeal. Zeal is they're both enthusiastic, you could say, outward motions of things. Zeal for the house of the Lord will consume me, of course, is what, as you've referenced Jesus in the temple. He's acting out of anger, and it's zeal, not wrath. What makes it between zeal and wrath? And I think you're right to say that wrath is this sense of, you move from vengeance, which is about restoring an objective order. So it's about the thing that was violated in the situation, which you can take a little distance to, even if it's you. Someone slighted you, there's been an evil done, and you want to restore what? You want to restore reputation, justice, something. But wrath is where, instead of the objective kind of feature, I take it, it's now you've become the center of attention. So it's not that justice qua justice in relation to you has been violated, but you have been violated through an act of injustice. It's the switch. It's just like, any sort of sins are often sins are putting the right relationship with God and us has been swapped to us and God. We're first and he's second, as opposed to the other way. Or just like in the passions and reason, it's supposed to be that reason directs passions, but sin, of course, flips that. This is an effect of the fall. And I think zeal and wrath are kind of that flip. The wrath and zeal might look the same outwardly. Like, it might look the same. Might be just more, I don't know, more shouting if Jesus was doing the temple out of excursion temple of wrath. But actually the internal act is very different, because out of wrath would be to make yourself great. And that's where I think kind of it gets exuberant. If you're zealous, then there's a moderation to it. There's an attentive. You're zealous, but there's a constraint. There's a limit, because you have to replace an objective order. Whereas wrath is, well, you could just keep expanding, because you're not God, we're not infinite, and I could require more praise. I could do more. I could ask for more. And so that's where it oversteps. And I think most people, when you do confess sins of anger, when you're angry, it's in a sense you were too angry. It's not that you were angry, it's that you went too far. You responded to a situation too much, too exuberantly, too negatively, this kind of thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that's when it comes down to, when we're actually like making this distinction, when we talk about wrath, it's an unjust anger. So like you said, it went to an extreme, right? It didn't have that middle ground. It went to an extreme of excess.
Yeah,
whereas
that's right.
Zeal is actually just anger. Like, there's a cause, there's an order to it. There is an offense, there is an injustice that's been done, and it's about restoring that, but in a just manner, with an appropriate thing. Like, there was innocence violated, so there needs to be a justice restored. And you want to do that not just very in a beige blah way, but like, no, that it should take vigor, that should upset us, and we should be passionate about restoring justice. We should be passionate about restoring the honor and dignity to those that had it taken away from them for whatever reason. So zeal is a good thing. We want to encourage that. We want people to be zealous, but that's about just anger, whereas unjust goes to that excess and it becomes kind of unwieldy, and then does do a lot of hurt and damage outside of restoring order. And I really appreciate how you kind of started saying that, like, there's this desire to restore order outside of just inflicting retaliation or something on the other.
And also the circumstances such that you could imagine a situation where someone slights you in a conversation around friends or something like this, and you feel angry at the person, they've challenged you, whether they said that you're making that up or whatever, or challenge something you know to be true. And you might say, okay, I'm feeling angry and I have this emotional response and I want to seek justice for this. And the question is that the point where you like lay into that person for having two cats or something? Like, do you just lay in it? It's like that. Is that the moment to do this? Or is it better to, is there another way to deal with it? Is there a better time? Is it impossible in that moment to correct all wrongs? Because there are just, in life, this is part of the deal with the virtuous life, is knowing through prudence, Father Gregory's book, blah, blah, blah. It's being attentive to acting in the right ways for the right reason at the right times, knowing when's the appropriate time to pull your friend aside and say, hey, you said this, I'm wondering, I just want to let you know that's really, that kind of thing, knowing when to do this in the right time. And that's the moral life, is being attentive to how to do that well. Second thing is, in those situations, for instance, where you can't do something about it, or it's not right to do something about it, or even if you're feeling like you're bordering on going too far, you feel like there's something going on here, I'm angry, but you don't have, you want to fight that a little bit because you think, I'm an angry person in general, I know I fly off the handle with this person, what have you. A lot of times to avoid the vices is to bring in corresponding virtues. So what would you say on the positive? What kind of positive virtues or even emotions, you could say, should we be attentive to when we feel angry and are worried that we might be going too far, or there's no way to get around it? What kind of positive virtues would you say here?
I think the virtue that corresponds with anger, and I'm going back to the Beatitudes on this, is meekness. Now, meekness, I think, gets a bad rap a lot of times for just being like a pushover, like a doormat, like, oh, the meek, look at him. He just lets everybody do whatever, says anything, it just rolls off his back. No, meekness, I think, maybe in a more contemporary way, is to call it gentleness. So like, you're not necessarily
like a sissy.
letting people, exactly. Like, that's what we want everybody to be, just like, little pansies. It's fine. But we want to make sure it's that gentleness that you're still able to confront the issues. You're still able to talk to this person, but you do so not with that sharpness and that edge to cut, to do damage, to retaliate, that maybe anger is pushing you to. But you can maybe just soften that a little bit and introduce that kind of proper relationship where it's not about this like personal attack, but you maybe move more with zeal. And I think that's where gentleness or meekness can help move anger from wrath closer to zeal. And it's a gentleness to say, like, no, I'm still going to address this issue because there was an injustice done, but I want to do so with actual gentleness to help this person maybe either recognize what wrong they've done or help move them to contrition or sorrow. And that's only really done through gentleness. And it's actually imitating the divine and how he operates with us with great gentleness. So that's where I would say is like focusing on that, where it's not writing off and say, well, whatever, I'm angry, but I'm just not going to deal with it because I'm a meek person. No, shut up. Deal with the conflict in front of you, but to do so with meekness and gentleness.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely, I like you tied this in. I'm going to make a shameless plug to Saint Faustina, my favorite saint, is that, God's first attribute in relation to us is mercy. Because you might say, why respond in gentleness? Why respond in gentleness? And there's good reasons not to. One of the good reasons, too, is because that's how God acts. And generally, if you want to know someone, you have to act like them and be with them. And so if you want to live with God for eternity as opposed to the other option, then you want to be more like him. And therefore, meekness and gentleness are expressions of mercy, which is the way he responds to us as opposed to anger. We could all do a whole kind of how Catholics understand atonement versus how Calvinists understand atonement, all of this. But he responds not in anger, of course, but in mercy and gentleness. And Christ, of course, is angry at points when he needs to be angry. But the majority of times Christ is interacting with people, he's not angry. He's not responding with anger with this. He's pretty gentle. And therefore, the reason you might say of why be gentle with someone, because God's been gentle with you.
Yes.
And don't worry, other people have too. There's plenty of reasons, because guess what? You are not the center of the universe or the key actor on the stage here. That's God, and your emotions are set and your passions are set to register actual reality and not your own conception of your own play that you're over dramatizing. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Well, so hopefully this has been helpful. I've enjoyed it, and to talk. And it's so important that people get their passions right and their emotions right. We're not layer cakes. I think people have this conception of like we're animals, but then you throw on a
layer cakes.
Yeah, so it's like you got a layer. It's like when we think of us being rational animals, I was thinking about this recently. We think about us being rational animals. It's like you have, a cake it's got the regular kind of yellow cake part, and then it's got the frosting attached on top. But it's not spread through, right? It's frosting on top of the cake, so you have layers. And I think people think rational animals means like we're animals, like the kind of yellow cake, and then you throw on that kind of rational part, and it relates to it because when I bite into a cake, I bite into a yellow cake with icing. When I bite into a man, I bite into an animal with a rational thing on top of it. But that's not true. When you bite into a man, you've got flesh, and it tastes gross. But no, they integrate for us like our emotions sort of thing. And so the passions are part of our reason. They're related to this and integrated. And if we don't integrate the passions because they're a lot louder due to the effects of sin, our reason's in serious trouble. So I think it's super important to work on and getting these passions correctly, so that you're actually making not a layer cake, but understand that we're something like a mixed bowl or a parfait or something.
Being. Oh my
whatever.
Gosh, I'm crying. I'm laughing so hard. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's probably.
I just think that this is new material for our merch store. If we get T-shirts made that say like "Get your passions right," or T-shirts,
don't be a layer cake.
Maybe mugs that say "Don't be a layer cake."
Don't bite into humans.
Yeah, we're going to take that to our next quarterly meeting for new merch. So be on the lookout for that, listeners. Let's see if we can get that moving.
That's fantastic. But thanks again to all of our supporters and listeners. If you'd like to give money and support in any fashion, even baked goods, check us out at patreon.com/Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Truth Social, whatever. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review or more. Visit godsplaining.org to shop aforementioned merch and get dates and information for upcoming Godsplaining events. We've got some retreats coming up. Please pray for those too. We could use those prayers, and it's always a fun time. We're looking forward to, I know Father Joseph Anthony is as well, to seeing some of you face to face, prosopon, the way God sees the Son. God the Father sees the Son, the Holy Spirit, face to face. So it's always great to do that and to shake hands and actually see human beings again. So we're looking forward to that. Pray for us. We'll be praying for you, and that's enough for this episode of Godsplaining.